Well, the date is now set for Alan Jackson's last big show. The singer is set to perform at Nissan Stadium June 27th. For the show he's calling Last Call. One more for the road, the finale. Next year's show will be the last full-length concert for Jackson's touring career.
May 17th, 2025. Milwaukee. A sold-out arena. 50,000 people. And then Alan Jackson steps to the mic and quietly says it. "This is my last road show."
And y'all may have heard that I'm kind of winding down, and in fact, this is my last road show of my career.
What does it mean when a voice you've known for decades suddenly decides it's finished? And why does a single sentence feel heavier than an entire career of #1 hits? No build-up, no spectacle, just a sentence that lands like a system shutting down. Because at that moment, this isn't just a concert ending. It's an era going silent. And the question no one in that crowd could answer was simple. How do you say goodbye to something that helped define the sound of your entire life? Railroad tracks roots. The house sat so close to the railroad tracks in Newnan, Georgia, that young Alan Jackson could feel the freight trains in his chest before he heard them coming. His grandfather had built it himself. A small wooden structure that was never designed to hold 2 adults and 5 children, but that is exactly what it did. Alan was born there on October 17th, 1958, the only boy among 4 sisters, growing up in a home where space was something you shared and silence was something that didn't exist. Newnan was a working town, and the Jacksons were a working family. Alan's father, Eugene, spent his entire life underneath cars and trucks at the local garage, a mechanic who could diagnose an engine by sound alone and fix problems that stumped men half his age. Eugene never made much money, but he made something more valuable than money. He made a living with his hands, and he taught his son that there was dignity in that kind of work, regardless of what the paycheck said at the end of the week. Alan grew up watching those hands, calloused, stained with motor oil, never still. And he admired them more than anything he would later see on a stage or a television screen. The family's social life revolved almost entirely around their Baptist church, where Alan's mother made sure every one of her children was in attendance every single Sunday, without exception. It was there, standing between his sisters in a crowded pew, that Alan first realized his voice could do something that most voices couldn't. When he sang the old gospel hymns, people in the congregation would turn around to look. Not because he was doing anything wrong, because something about the way he carried a melody made them stop whatever they were thinking and just listen. By the time he was a teenager, Alan had saved enough money from odd jobs to buy a beat-up guitar. He spent every free hour teaching himself to play. He learned by ear, copying the country songs he heard on the radio, figuring out chords through trial and error, wearing calluses into fingers that had never touched a guitar pick before. Nobody in the Jackson family was a professional musician. Nobody had connections to the music industry. And nobody would have believed you if you told them that the quiet boy from the railroad house would one day sell more records than almost anyone in the history of country music. But Alan didn't need anyone to believe it. He just needed to keep playing until his hands knew the strings as well as his father's hands knew an engine. Denise changed everything. Denise Jackson was the best thing that ever happened to Alan Jackson. She proved it long before he ever set foot on a stage in Nashville. They married in 1979. High school sweethearts from Newnan who had grown up within miles of each other.
Denise didn't need to change her last name, as her maiden name was also Jackson. When they first married, the Jacksons lived a humble life. Denise worked as a teacher before becoming a flight attendant.
And never imagined their lives would lead anywhere beyond the Georgia state line. Denise took a job as a flight attendant to keep them afloat, while Alan worked odd jobs during the week and played honky-tonks on the weekends for whatever they'd pay him. And it was that job, that completely random twist of employment, that would change both of their lives in a way neither of them could have predicted. One day in the mid-1980s, Denise was working a shift at the Atlanta airport when she spotted a tall, silver-haired man walking through the terminal. She recognized him instantly. It was Glenn Campbell, one of the biggest country music stars in the world. The man behind Rhinestone Cowboy and Wichita Lineman and a dozen other songs that had defined an entire era of American music. Most people would have been too nervous or too polite to approach a celebrity in an airport. Denise Jackson was not most people. She walked right up to Glenn Campbell and told him that her husband was a singer and a songwriter who dreamed of making it in country music. And she asked him, point blank, what Alan needed to do to get his foot in the door. What happened next sounds made up, but is completely true. Glenn Campbell did not brush her off. He did not give her a polite excuse to end the conversation. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a business card, and told Denise to have Alan come to Nashville. By that single moment, a flight attendant's courage and a stranger's generosity became the spark that lit everything that followed. Alan and Denise packed up their lives and moved to Nashville with almost nothing. A dream built on the back of a business card from a man they'd met in an airport. Alan spent years working in the mailroom at the Nashville network, just to be near the industry while his demo tapes collected dust on the desks of producers who never called back. The rejections were constant. The money was almost non-existent. But Alan kept writing songs and Denise kept believing in him. Eventually, Arista Nashville took a chance on the kid from Georgia. His debut album, Here in the Real World, climbed the charts like it had been waiting its whole life for someone to let it out. So as Alan himself put it years later, I came to Nashville with nothing. Gary was talking about 3 chords and the truth. Mine was more like 3 chords and a prayer. Country music truth. When Alan Jackson released Don't Rock the Jukebox in 1991,
recorded live from Austin, Texas, it's Austin City Limits, celebrating our 20th anniversary with one of the most popular singers in country music today, Alan Jackson.
Don't rock the jukebox.
it wasn't just a song, it was a declaration of war against everyone in Nashville who thought country music needed to sound like pop radio to survive. The title itself was a direct message to the record executives and radio programmers who were pushing artists to drop the steel guitars and fiddles in favor of synthesizers and drum machines. Alan was drawing a line in the sand, and he was daring the entire industry to cross it. What followed was one of the most dominant decades any country artist has ever had. But Chattahoochee became the kind of song that every person in America seemed to know the words to, whether they considered themselves country fans or not. Drive was a tribute to his father and the simple pleasures of growing up in rural Georgia, a song so honest and so specific in its details that it somehow became universal. Gone Country was a sharp commentary on the sudden flood of pop artists trying to cash in on country's commercial success, delivered with enough humor that you almost missed how pointed the criticism really was. The numbers were staggering by any standard, in any genre. 35 #1 singles, over 75 million records sold worldwide, 2 Grammy Awards, 16 CMA Awards, 17 ACM Awards, induction into the Country Music Hall of Fame, induction into the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame. Billboard ranked him one of the top 10 country artists of all time. But what made Alan Jackson different from the other hitmakers of his era was never the numbers or the trophies. It was the fact that he never once tried to be anything other than what he was. While other artists hired image consultants and chased whatever sound was trending that season, Alan wore his jeans and his cowboy hat and sang about the things that mattered to the people who actually listened to country music. Working people, small towns, church on Sunday, the quiet dignity of an ordinary life lived honestly. His fans didn't just like his music, they trusted him. Because in an industry full of people pretending to be something they weren't, Alan Jackson was exactly who he appeared to be. And then came September 11th, and everything he'd built, every song, of every album, every award, was suddenly context for the most important piece of music he would ever write. He sat in front of the television that day, like the rest of us, and watched the world collapse in real time. But while most people were paralyzed by horror and confusion, the songwriter in him, the part of his brain that had always processed the world through melody and lyrics, began reaching for words. By the end of that terrible day, he had written most of Where Were You When the World Stopped Turning. Weeks later, he performed it live at the CMA Awards. No promotion, no build-up, just a man with a guitar walking onto a stage and singing a song nobody in the room had heard before. By the second verse, people were crying. By the final note, the entire auditorium was in tears. The industry veterans who had heard thousands of country songs in their careers, completely undone by the plain truth of what Alan Jackson had put into words. It won CMA Song of the Year and became something bigger than a hit. It became an American anthem born from grief, proving that a single honest voice with a guitar could still move an entire nation. Country music pain. Long before Alan Jackson received his own diagnosis, he had already lived through the horror of Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease.
Tonight, Country Music Hall of Famer Alan Jackson is opening up about his rare nerve disorder. He says he has Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease. It's a disorder that damages nerves in the arms and legs. Jackson says he wanted to go public to explain why people may see him stumble or lose his balance on stage.
By watching it destroy his father. Eugene Jackson, the mechanic who had spent his entire life working with his hands, began losing the strength and feeling in his fingers and feet. The decline was gradual and merciless. The hands that had rebuilt engines and taught a young Alan that a man's dignity came from his willingness to work began to shake. It then weaken, then lose the ability to grip the tools that had defined his entire identity. Alan watched it all, and he knew, from the moment his father was diagnosed, that there was a chance he carried the same genetic sentence in his own blood. He did. Doctors diagnosed Alan with CMT in 2011, but he kept it private for a full decade. When he finally told the world, in a 2021 interview with the Today Show, the honesty was devastating. "There's no cure for it," he said, "but it's been affecting me for years, and it's getting more and more obvious. I know I'm stumbling around on stage, and now I'm having a little trouble balancing, even in front of the microphone." He paused. I just feel very uncomfortable." CMT is a genetic neurological condition that attacks the peripheral nerves, the ones that control movement and sensation in the hands and feet. It doesn't kill you. It doesn't affect the voice, but it slowly, quietly steals the body's ability to do the things it once did without thinking. Walking, standing, gripping a guitar neck, keeping your balance in front of a microphone while 20,000 people watch. By May 2025, during that final road show in Milwaukee, Alan performed parts of the set seated. The man who had spent 30 years standing tall on stages across the world had adapted because he had no other choice. And he never complained about it. Not once. But the disease wasn't the only thing that tested what Alan Jackson was made of. Years earlier, at the height of his fame, he was unfaithful to Denise, the woman who had walked up to Glenn Campbell in an airport, the woman who had moved to Nashville on nothing but faith, the woman who had believed in him through years of rejection and poverty. He broke the one promise that was supposed to matter more than any record deal or #1 hit. The separation was ugly in the way that only private pain made public can be. Denise was devastated, and Alan knew he had done something that could not be undone. What saved their marriage was not anything Alan did. It was Denise's faith. She turned to her relationship with God with an intensity that surprised even her own family, and she found in that faith the strength to forgive what most people would consider unforgivable. She eventually wrote a book about it called It's All About Him. And the title wasn't about Alan. It was about God, about surrendering your pain to something bigger than yourself and finding peace on the other side of betrayal. Their reconciliation became one of country music's great love stories. But it was built on Denise's grace, not Alan's worthiness. And then, years later, more heartbreak. Their youngest daughter, Maddie, married a man named Ben Seligman. Barely a year after the wedding, Ben died in a boating accident. Alan stood beside his daughter and watched her endure a grief that no father can fix and no amount of fame or money can ease. As he said quietly in an interview, "Your daddy always takes care of everything, and I couldn't do much about that." Alan Jackson, farewell. On June 27, 2026, Alan Jackson will take the stage at Nissan Stadium in Nashville for the last time.
Alan Jackson is retiring from touring, but celebrating his career with one final show with all his friends. The concert will take place June 27th here at Nissan Stadium in Nashville.
The show is called Last Call, One More for the Road, the finale. More than 50,000 people will fill the stands. Luke Bryan, Eric Church, Luke Combs, Carrie Underwood, Miranda Lambert, Keith Urban, Riley Green, Cody Johnson, John Party, Lee Ann Womack, and more will all be there to perform and celebrate a career that reshaped what country music could be. The concert sold out almost immediately. "We just felt like we had to end it all where it all started for me," Alan said. "And that's in Nashville, Music City, where country music lives." But this isn't just a farewell concert. It's the closing of a door that has been slowly swinging shut for 2 decades. Because the Nashville that Alan Jackson is saying goodbye to is not the Nashville he walked into with a business card and a prayer in the 1980s. The steel guitars have gone quiet. The fiddles have been replaced by drum machines and pop hooks. The stories about real people living real lives have given way to party anthems about trucks, tailgates, and cold beer that all blur together into one endless summer that has nothing to do with what country music was supposed to be. Alan knew it was happening. In 2000, he and George Strait recorded Murder on Music Row, a direct accusation that Nashville had killed traditional country in exchange for pop crossover money. That song wasn't just a hit, it was a prophecy, and everything it predicted came true. When George Strait announced his own farewell tour in 2012, the writing was on the wall. The two men who had fought hardest to keep real country alive were both stepping back from an industry that no longer wanted what they represented. See, and for millions of fans, people who grew up hearing their own lives in those songs, who heard their small towns and their Sunday mornings and their working-class values reflected back to them in 3 chords, and the truth. The silence that followed felt like an erasure. Alan could have adapted. He could have hired younger songwriters, added electronic beats, chased the streaming algorithms. He refused. He chose to make the music he believed in, even as the industry pushed him further and further to the margins. That decision cost him radio play and mainstream relevance, but it earned him something that no algorithm can measure: the absolute, unshakable loyalty of every fan who still believes that country music should sound like country music. And when the lights finally come up, nothing about that silence feels empty. It feels loaded, because what we're really witnessing isn't just the end of a tour, or even the closing of a career defined by 35 #1 hits. It's the slow withdrawal of a voice that once held an entire genre together. Steady, unshaken, unmanufactured in a world that increasingly relies on everything being engineered. Alan Jackson's story doesn't conclude in a single night in Milwaukee, or even on a final stage in Nashville. It continues in the songs, in the memories, in the people who grew up believing that music could still be honest without being complicated. But there's a harder question lingering underneath all of it. When the last of that generation steps off the stage, and the silence fully takes over. What exactly replaces a sound that was never meant to be replaced?